I'd heard his name before, but until I had a friend tell me who it probably was, I had like no idea what he even looked like. I didn't know the guy.
Wow.
When I was actually on set, I was scared. Like I was shaking because I saw how heated the other conversations had gotten.
Your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Yeah, religion is correlated with better outcomes in life. But the problem is this is just like, it's gonna be like a simple correlation causation fallacy. We're perceiving that one variable is causing the other when really they're just correlated.
What was the day of the shoot like for you? What is kind of the background that wasn't shot and put up on the internet? Welcome to Truth and Tradition. In this episode, I'm speaking with ZINA, a social media influencer and recent guest on the YouTube channel Jubilee. This recent appearance allowed ZINA to speak with Professor of Psychology Dr. Jordan Peterson regarding his views on religion. ZINA's appearance in this video was particularly significant because it left Mr. Peterson silent.
He pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
But what was it really like to be on Jubilee? Is there anything of significance that the audience might have missed? And what should we all take away from this debate? All of that and more is coming right up. But first, I wanted to let y'all know that I recently started a buymeacoffee.com site. This is a great way for you to play a larger part in supporting the channel. The link is in the description, and I'll share more information about this later on. So keep that in mind. But that's enough dilly-dallying for now. Let's get on with the video. Welcome to the podcast, ZINA. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing awesome. You?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been pretty nice lately. I'm definitely enjoying the nicer weather around here. But you have been getting a lot of attention lately, and you just had a really great video on Jubilee, big appearance, talking to Jordan Peterson and all of that. And I was definitely very impressed by that whole conversation. So can you maybe walk me through a little bit of what that was like, getting on Jubilee and preparing for this conversation? Did you even know you were going to speak with Jordan Peterson? What was that whole process like for you?
Yeah, so in regards to like how I ended up going on, so I've always been like a fan of Jubilee. Never really thought I would like, be someone to participate. But what happened was Charlie Kirk ended up coming to my campus. And at first I was like kind of debating whether I wanted to go up and talk to him, speak to him. But I was like, you know what, this might be an opportunity you don't get again. So I went up and I talked to Charlie Kirk. I kind of asked him a question that he usually like dodges, it seems to be, on the internet. And I recorded that, had my friend record it and post that to my social media. And after that happened, Jubilee ended up contacting me, and they were like, "We'd love to have you on this episode." And from there, I was like, of course, it's kind of like something I would always have loved to do. And that's kind of how I ended up getting selected. And then in regards to just like being on the show in general, we weren't told who was going to be on. Like none of us knew that.
Oh.
They didn't explicitly tell us, but we kind of got some information to prepare, like here are some of the prompts, or like here are some things I might say. So from that, people kind of started to piece things together. Okay, so what Christian would say something like this? And it was pretty easy to kind of figure out that it was Jordan. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So you basically just had the prompts. It sounds like you were pretty familiar with Jordan Peterson and his stance on religion. Was that just something you already kind of knew, or was that something based on the prompts you were like, I might be talking to Jordan Peterson, I'm going to look into this? What was all that like?
Actually really interesting. So I'd heard his name before, but like until I had a friend tell me who it probably was, I had like no idea what he even looked like. I didn't know the guy. So
wow.
Yeah, it was like 4 days before I was like, oh crap, okay, so I need to like study now. Really philosophical guy. I was like, okay, let me like get into his brain. So kind of like my approach with these videos is like, if I can figure out who this person is, how can I just completely understand their framework? And obviously I have some type of disagreement. So how can I, kind of like extract that and then bring that up in a way that they must answer? And here, I think in the video, we kind of saw that the contention or like the issue I had with his framework, he was unable to like reconcile. with us. And I think, and personally, I don't know if he kind of found it this way, but I think a lot of people will see that the problem I had with his framework was pretty fundamental to it. And I think it's something that he probably will need to reconcile in regards to just like the validity of it in general. So that was kind of the approach I took. I didn't know the guy. I had to just like study.
Well, I was impressed. You could have fooled me as a longtime fan or something. So it was definitely impressive. I think a lot of his kind of philosophy when it comes to religion comes from Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky specifically, who, you know, went through pretty much hell here on earth, prisons and prison camps, and he came out of it a totally different man, totally changed man. We'll get back to the conversation in just a moment, but first, do you like coffee? I sure do. In fact, most days, coffee is the very thing that provides me with the energy to get these episodes out to all of you. If you enjoy these podcasts and would like to support the channel, you can send me a tip at buymeacoffee.com/truth_tradition. Also linked in the description down below. Here you can send me a one-time or reoccurring gift if you really love me. Let's keep things PG. You can also send me a custom message, which is greatly appreciated. That's buymeacoffee.com/truth_tradition, or the link in the description down below. Cheers. I can see how his kind of vision of Christianity, which is very centered on it's good for society. We need these good values for society. And if we don't have religion, then our society will go into nihilism and pretty much be annihilated. That's a lot in his writings. And so I think that is reflected in Jordan Peterson's, I guess, philosophy. So when speaking about his philosophy, though, can you maybe talk, you said some of the things he couldn't quite substantiate fully. Can you specify what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. So in regards to that, I think it's just interesting. He makes these claims about how to interpret the Bible. Like in the video we saw, like he defines worship as prioritizing something. So it's not just like kind of getting on your hands and knees and like, you know, truly devoting yourself, but it's like you prioritizing one thing over the other. He says something like, everyone has a God. So like having a God means like whatever you value the most, and you're like the bottom of like your value hierarchy, that is God, and certain things like that. And then he'll also say things like, the stories in the Bible are meant to be interpreted as meta-truths. And I think you can kind of substitute the word meta-truth as like a metaphor, aka like a transcendent story that has existed or been like referenced all throughout time. You know, so something like, you know, the story of Cain and Abel would just be a story that is meant to be not taken like, or we don't know if it should be taken literally, right? So it's just like a story. What we do know is that story about two brothers fighting and like the consequences of like, you know, sibling fighting and whatever. And this happens all throughout time. So he makes these interpretations about the Bible and the events and stories in the Bible. And this interpretation, you know, he doesn't allow us to understand, right? He can't figure out whether or not these stories, I have to use the words when I'm speaking to him, like existed in ontological reality. What that really means to like the average viewer is like, these things actually happen? Like, were these people real people, right? You can't even tell us if like the resurrection happened. And when most people read the Bible, the first impression they get is, okay, well, to be a Christian, I must believe that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. I think so many Christians have referenced that. 1 Corinthians 15:17, there's so many places where you have to, where it says that you ought to believe Jesus is your savior, right? And in his interpretation, it's cool to like, it's fine to interpret the Bible in a certain way. But he can't give us any reasons to believe that this interpretation, that these are all just stories that are meta-truths, are, if that's like the true interpretation. He cannot make a claim on how we should know that his interpretation is the correct one. And like I said in the video, this, if you don't know this, like whether we should believe that these things really happened or didn't, that could be the difference between someone believing the wrong thing and then going to hell or heaven, completely thinking they're Christian when they're not. And I think that's like a super important thing to look at. That was the big issue I had with this framework.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. When you speak with Christians specifically, what are more common ways of understanding this faith of Christianity when you have dialogues with other Christians?
Yeah. So from my understanding, it's usually that you believe that Jesus Christ was a real person who, enacted miracles and died on the cross for our sins. Um, and, essentially we're all sinful beings innately. We have the sin in us. And the only way that we can be saved is that we believe, specifically that we believe in Jesus. Not that like we do all these good acts. We must believe that Jesus did this great thing for us, this big sacrifice is the good news. That's the story. And once you believe that and you kind of work with the Bible, you have that true belief in your heart. You have a relationship with God, you're a Christian, you go to heaven, etc.
No, that's definitely my kind of general grasp of it when I ever have dialogues. I mean, I was a Christian for most of my life as well, and that was kind of the main message, Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And that's the message of the gospel that people can then spread and share. And so, yeah, his kind of view, his way of doing things is definitely unique. I can see value in it, but I also think, like you said, it's important to understand, is this what the Bible intends? And I think this is part of the reason why at the end, you brought up a specific claim for him to respond to. You said to him, Jordan Peterson's framework of understanding Christianity is probably not the one the Bible intended us to use. So I have a feeling I can understand kind of what prompted you to ask that sort of question. But what was going through your mind during the conversation, during the debate, and what brought you specifically to prompting him with that specific quote?
Yeah, so I think what prompted me was before I even got to the debate, when I was doing my research, and I was getting into the mind of Peterson. I was just watching and rewatching videos and interviews, and I was just like, what is this guy trying to say? And once I finally got it, that was the first question that came to mind. Okay, like, I understand what you're explaining. Like, you're explaining an entire framework for understanding the Bible, and the way that you define terms initially, and the way that you kind of just lay out the framework, everything follows internally. The only problem is like, okay, you created this logical way of viewing the Bible. Why are you saying this is true? Because interpretation matters so much. Like, if you're just trying to say that you're spreading some type of interpretation to kind of be a function for like a functional use in someone's life, this, when we interpret the Bible this way, it makes people happy. And, I'm not trying to say anything about like the truth of my interpretation or that, like, anything like that. Like, I'll be like, okay, that's fine. But like, if you're saying that this is like the objective way to interpret the Bible, my question is just, okay, like, there's so many interpretations. How, like what makes this one more likely to be the case than not? And just like, as an average person reading the Bible, I just don't see how we can come to that as like an intuitive conclusion, or if we're just like probabilistically looking at it. Like, it just doesn't seem like that is probably the way that it's intended to be, read. I think that's an important question when you're spreading a doctrine, and especially for people who believe in a higher power, like, that can have a lot of consequences that can be even negative when we're spreading something that we might not even know is true. So I feel like the reason why I asked that is just because it was the first question that popped out as soon as I really like it clicked and I realized what he was talking about. And then when I was actually on set, I was surprised at how like nice of a conversation we had. I was scared, like I was shaking because I saw how heated the other conversations had gotten. And I was like, oh, I don't know how I'm gonna keep it cool with him. He does that, with me too. But we ended up, obviously, he had a lot of respect for me, I think, because I kind of tried to get into his mind. I tried to grapple with it from where he was coming from. And I came in hoping, after our first debate, hoping and kind of expecting that he was going to pick me just because of how nicely our conversation turned out.
You definitely nailed down a lot of the points and laid out his perspective quite nicely. So, yeah. I was very impressed with that. What was the day of the shoot like for you? What kind of what is kind of the background that wasn't shot and put up on the internet?
So I will say that Jubilee had a lot of integrity, especially in this debate, where it's just like pretty much everything that you see is kind of like what we got, other than just like set direction and everything like that. So that was cool to see that like everything was like nothing was cut out. Like everything was pretty much.
What do you mean by set direction?
Oh, just like, telling people where to sit and stuff like that, like how we're going to start.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So just like the way that, videos are filmed and stuff like that.
So did they position you specifically, like where in the circle you were going to sit, or did you select that?
Yeah, they kind of positioned us. I don't know. I think it had to just do with like lighting and just like, I don't know why, but we hadn't kind of had places that we were told to sit and everything like that. And then just like timing, obviously there was like a set, so they were directing us in regards to like what was said and the content, everything was pretty much the same. But I do remember Danny's part, which was the guy that had the super heated conversation with him, that highlight of
he
the video.
said, you believe in nothing or something along those lines.
It was like, I think it was Peterson said, "You're really quite something." And Danny said, "Oh, well, you're really quite nothing." And he really stopped the conversation. Probably the highlight of the video. I remember after that happened, it felt like he was in trouble. Like it was like a big issue. And we didn't even know if that was going to stay in the video. It ended up being like a highlight. So it was such an amazing clip that I knew they were going to have to, I felt like they had to keep it in. But after that, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if he's like rude or something, but no, he did. I think he did like a really good job either way, just like with kind of pushing Jordan Peterson anyway. Yeah, I think other than that, pretty much everything was the same as the video.
People have mentioned this a few times. Like the video was initially 1 Christian versus 20 atheists, right? And Jubilee had to change that because Jordan Peterson isn't quite the most upfront about exactly what he believes or what category he's in. And so it's very, very interesting. One thing I think when it comes to his like understanding of Christianity, that's interesting is I don't think he's quite as concerned with the content of Christianity in terms of like the stories. But I think what matters most to him is, like you said, kind of these meta truths, these things that you can sort of take away from the stories and how that keeps a society together. It's interesting, the points where he gets maybe heated or frustrated, I think they always tend to be on points where someone's like critiquing the societal benefit part of Christianity rather than the validity of its truth claims, I guess. I don't know. Is that kind of what you felt about Jordan when you were kind of there?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people were more interested in just like the intuitive understanding of Christianity, and kind of like, this is why I feel like the question I asked was like the biggest question. And I think it was a question that was kind of resonant in even how everyone spoke. It's just like, why are you defining terms like this? Like, why do you think that to have a God means to have a fundamental value? That means every single person like has a God. It just doesn't seem like it makes sense to define these words this way. And thus people were trying to kind of just pivot back to like the general definition of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to worship, and etc. And I think that angers him because he's like, look at God, you guys are focused on these minute details, and I'm looking at things from a bigger holistic picture. I'm talking about events and stories that have existed all throughout time. And that's what matters. Like this transcendent, iterated story that resonates with people. I think that's like, mind blowing. That's generally what I think he thinks when he's talking about these things. To say that Christianity is blank when it just, and you have no basis to say so, I think it's just a problem there. But yeah, I think most people were attacking it from the most colloquial sense of Christianity. And I think that's not wrong. But I think with Jordan Peterson, you have to work him from the ground of his framework up. And that's what I tried to do, to kind of just expose where it was coming from. And I think hopefully I was able to give people an understanding of like what he was trying to say. And it didn't just end up going nowhere, because I tried to just completely lay it out and then attack exactly why I disagreed with him and his internal framework.
So as you mentioned before, Jordan Peterson isn't the first person you've spoken to in the public sphere. You also spoke to Charlie Kirk. Can you talk about that experience? What was all of that like for you?
Yeah, that one was just a way less structured. I don't know if you can even call it debate. Well, for me, I was one of the people who wanted to speak, so I kind of had to push to the front. the crowd, and it was just a bunch of older and younger guys kind of around me, and it was almost getting to a point of like physically, like people were pushing me and like just like invading my space, and it was like very, very just like a high tense situation I'd never really been in. So it was really a lot harder for me to get my point across, I feel like. And I think Kirk, even compared to like Peterson, just engages in a lot more bad faith argumentation. And I could just, there were so many fallacies and straw mans that he would like appeal to. And it was hard to get that out when you would have people like literally like trying to touch you and like trying to grab. It was just a really interesting, it was a really weird situation. But there was one point I thought was so funny where I was asking him a question just about like his beliefs on like gender. And he was like, all right, guys, you want me to pray for her? Sort of just like appealing to the crowd in that way. And then I couldn't speak anymore at that point. Like it was just like,
Yeah.
because I'm surrounded by people who support him no matter what he says. So just things like that where there was no way I was going to have like the ability to press him or stop him from pivoting or just any of that. Like he controlled everything that was going on. And it's like no one can see that like, hey, like that's not how you argue. You don't just stop the debate and start, reading off a quote from the Bible and then end it. Like that's not, so I thought it was a lot less of a representation of kind of like how I speak to people and everything like that.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Charlie Kirk is he has solid rhetoric and he has quite a big following, and so he uses kind of the two together in order to get his points across. And it's basically you're walking right into the lion's den, which kudos to you. You did that. That's very difficult to do, I'm sure. But you did it, and yeah, it's definitely quite a wild scene. It's a show more than anything else. It's a show of rhetoric and pizzazz. When we look at like people like Charlie Kirk, what do you think is important for the general public to know when seeing him either on social media or at different rallies? And it doesn't have to just be Charlie Kirk, but a lot of these people in the public sphere. What do you think is important for the general public to know about these people?
Yeah. So in regards to that, I think like it's just so hard because you have to just be committed to understanding argumentation in general, to like watch these people and not fall down like a loophole that is uninformed at the basic. There are just so many strategies being employed all the time to the point where it's like you have to commit like really to like understanding like each and every one and being able to pick out every single one. It's even hard sometimes like when I'm just like watching these things because I'll pick out a bunch and sometimes I'll miss an even other one. Like sometimes you'll like naturally feel like you have to accept some like truth or fact that he says like when there's no nuance behind it. Like I don't know, like you'll give out a stat about a group of people and like you'll be like, okay, wait, well, this race is correlated with, this outcome, like violence or whatever. And you can't, when someone says something like that so quickly, you can't, stop and examine that. Like, hold on, well, this race has also been, historically, fell down like a line of like poverty that was systematic at one point. And we have to look at how that like lingers, and then we have to look at how that like relates to poverty, and then poverty relates to violence, and all these different like, connections that just seem so invisible when someone just gives you such like a blanket statement. So I guess I would just say, if you want to watch Charlie Kirk, a lot of things that he says are just like flat out, just like disproven, but also just like, you just need to be well equipped with all those, rhetoric devices. You have to understand them like to a T. And I think a lot of people are just not committed to doing that.
I was having a conversation with a sociologist earlier, and one of the things he mentioned is that nuance is never popular. Presenting nuanced facts and understandings about a topic is never really popular. What's popular are slogans and different things that people can rally behind. Part of why I think we see the not necessarily the truth, but partial truths and maybe truths that seem nice from the exterior, but ignore a lot of other facts being presented and prompted most of all, because they're simple, they're easy to quote, they're easy to say. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson actually he talks about three different truths in the world, and one of the three truths is he says there's a political truth to the world. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of the time is this political truth. Basically, you're spouting out something so much that people believe it, whether or not it's actually true. An example he gives is like people will say, well, did you know, we only use 10% of our brain. There's a whole movie made on it. Like Lucy is the movie made about someone unlocking 100% of their brain. That whole notion's actually false. It's not true. But everyone believes it. Everyone talks about it. And the reason people believe it and talk about it is because it's talked about so much. It's quoted and it's easy to say, right? Nuance is definitely so hard to portray in all of these sort of conversations and things of that sort.
It's so interesting to me, like, because it's like you have to make education and like deep thinking a cool thing. I think that's what I've kind of learned. Like you have to make it like something that's a trend, and it's just not happening anytime soon because it's like hard work. We're so focused on things that are just easy, like you said, easy to say, but just like things that are easy to do as well, or things that don't require some work and skill, and that becomes popular just because it's like, again, it's easier. People don't want to do those harder things, and it's only in certain spaces that like learning and knowing all these things and just like even just being genuine, that's like coming off something that like you want to be or like it's popularized. I think that's just like one of the biggest problems. Like you have to make it cool to be smart, not only smart, but just like genuine as a person. And it's just, for some reason, that's super hard for us. So
people throw around the word cultural Christianity and Christian nationalism a lot. Can you maybe explain what these terms are and how you see them affecting our society here in the US?
Yeah, so I hope I'm not incorrect or not missing something when I define them, but I would probably say that cultural Christianity is just the idea that Christian beliefs and Christian tenets and morals and values, not just like in reference to like the ontology of them or like if they're like real or like whatever, but like more as like just beliefs and fundamentals are generally good for society. They should be promoted and they have like a good function in society. So somewhere I think where a lot of people would categorize like someone like Peterson maybe would be like a cultural Christian. And then someone who's like a Christian nationalist, but he's like Christian beliefs and like just Christian goals should be held at like the national level. They should be systemized, and there should be a system, or we should live under a system that promotes them as law that everyone is held under. That's kind of where my understanding is at. But yeah, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's exactly kind of what I would specify it as. I think a good example that we see of Christian nationalism is this idea of Christianity and the economic system of capitalism being congruent. When you read the Bible, you can maybe pick out verses here and there that kind of show that capitalism might be represented in there. Again, the Bible is written by 40 authors over 2 millennia. You know, there's a lot of contexts to the Bible. But I think if you were to just read the Bible, you would probably come out with more of a socialist economic concept here rather than a capitalist one. But where Christian nationalism comes in is this idea of Christianity is this centerpiece to America. We have the Great Awakening happening in the 18th century. It's kind of they would argue, the roots of the US. And so we have to, whenever we're pushing a narrative, we have to connect it to Christianity to give it validity.
I think that in regards to like Christian nationalism, it's really difficult because like with things like Supreme Court decisions, like they'll use tenets that like technically certain rights were enacted by like Supreme Court decision and not and they aren't reserved. Like you don't have this right to bodily autonomy or to gay marriage or whatever at a national level, even though we've kind of existed under these conditions for so long and they seem to like coincide with most Americans' values. And people will say, that's not Christian nationalism. That's like by definition or by nature what the Constitution permits. And it's like, yeah, but I think we can kind of see this shift is coming from a push in the government towards the right that tends to be Christian. We saw that like most Americans did not like agree with like Roe v. Wade before it was overturned, and still we had like the government push against it. And I think, yeah, you can make this argument from like, you know, the Constitution and like the way that the government was set up, or like their system was set up like hundreds of years ago, and say this is like systematically approved. This is like the way things ought to be. We can probably see this stems from like a Christian nationalist tendency we're kind of going towards in America. And then in regards to like cultural Christianity, I think sometimes we see like, I think we're seeing culturally to some degree like a push to like a little bit more of a conservative, I guess, ideology, even in like Gen Z. I don't think all of Gen Z, but like a good amount. We see like a good portion kind of going back to this traditional way of thinking, and that usually tends to be like conservative and Christian.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably again coming.
Well, why do you think that is? I'm curious, because that's something I'm kind of surprised about. I have a few theories, but why do you think at least Gen Z is moving back toward traditional religion?
I don't know how much. I can't say anything on the statistics, but I can just like look on my TikTok feed, my Instagram feed, which I know, amazing source. But I think we can see that like people, at least there's a large group of people that are moving in this direction. I think it's probably just because of like the influences we're seeing from like the government, and not only that, but just like the influences we're seeing in regards to like things like men's content and how it's advertised. Like, for example, with Trump and being allowed to say the things he says, and also just being like an authority figure, like this tells something to like the public that certain things are okay, and you can still have legitimate authority while saying things that completely, I guess, sometimes embody conservatism, but also tend to be in some ways what other people would consider like heinous and not okay. So I think it's probably coming from that, like people feel like they're permitted in like kind of saying certain things that tend to not be, in my opinion, like egalitarian. And then also just like, yeah, the fact that Trump has been able to create this mass following, it's probably influencing the culture, and people are thinking, okay, this might be the way that we're heading. I guess this is what I'm supposed to embody. Then also just like people like the wave of like Andrew Tate, and we can look at the wave of like these conservative or seemingly conservative voices in the media who won't really brand themselves always as like political content, but by nature, the things that they're saying push a political agenda. And in that, we're seeing people accept these tenets and accept these values and ideas, thinking that this is just what a good man does, and not realizing the implications it has on politics, on the state of being, on society, etc. Like Andrew Tate brands himself as like someone who helps men, like he coaches men on life advice, how to be a good man, how to be, just like everything you need, right? He has all of that. And in that, he'll say things like, women can't drive, and saying things to just like women don't deserve rights or anything like that. And these are like politically charged ideas that he's spouting. And in that, it's just almost like a covert way of pushing like right-wing beliefs and conservative ideology without actually specifying that you're a conservative, or not even branding yourself as a conservative. Like I remember this show came out recently called Adolescence. You might have heard of it. It got super a lot of attention, where
I've heard of that one.
Yeah. And it just really talks about this phenomenon where young boys and just like men from the ages of like 12 to like 25 are just being pushed this content where it's just like, oh, I just want, something to listen to while I'm at the gym. And it'll just be telling them these things about, social roles, and just like any type of political statements will be embedded in like, this type of content that shouldn't, or has never been in the past political. So it's almost just like a covert messaging that's happening from the right.
Why do you think it's significant that they don't choose a political side and yet kind of put in political statements? Why do you think that's specifically significant?
Yeah, because you can look at just like the fact that some people might not even be looking for like a right-wing messaging. Like this is how you're going to like kind of push people to your side that weren't even intending to. Usually conservative content finds conservatives. Like we exist on social media in like, I forget what the word is, but like you're constantly pushed content that you enjoy, or like you would be interested in, and like you express interest.
Your algorithm or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you're usually going to find conservatives, kind of like seeking for conservative content. But now you have this whole new wave where men are, watching, entertaining, coming out conservative, and they never really even intended to. Like they didn't even have that idea. But because you're almost positing that conservative values are intrinsic to manhood. And I think that is just so interesting. And then like it's so interesting because it's just so many of these like male podcasters. Like I think if we even went down a list, we would just see most of them kind of in this camp where it's like they'll talk about like some random like wellness for men and be like, oh, by the way, and here's our sponsor, Donald Trump, or something like that, where it's just it almost feels like it's like
That'd be wild if you were sponsored by Donald Trump. I'd take that.
Yeah.
That'd be quite a sponsorship.
No, exactly. No.
Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
100%. Like it's just so funny to me. Like it just I don't think people are realizing it because people are not completely like I don't think people are so well versed in like how media works. Like I don't think people are so well versed in like everything that anyone posts is like actively trying to sell you something and they're trying to buy your time as well. People don't understand that everything is that people are using is intentional and nothing is coincidental and people don't care to learn about that type of stuff. They just want to have fun, want to listen to their guy speak and call it a day. So yeah, I think Joe Rogan would be a super good example. I don't know as much as I probably should about him because I'm not the target audience, I don't think. But I've seen some clips and it seems to be the same case. Even just like YouTubers and like even these debate podcasts, I think we see kind of a similar trend where you can see like a right-wing influence, even if it's not always covert. And that subliminal messaging is so important because people start to become conservative and sometimes they don't even realize that it's happening.
That's fair. I think so many things we're convinced by, we become slowly convinced by it over time, sort of subliminally, until we reach a specific point and we're like, oh, actually, I think I agree with said group, and it feels like an instant kind of moment, but really it's, like you said, these little messages that you get like here and there. You mentioned something there too that I found really interesting, this idea of people on social media not necessarily presenting you with a genuine version of themselves or presenting things genuinely. What exactly do you mean by that?
Anyone on social media understands that like there's an algorithm and that there's a way of doing things that like is more likely to get you seen. And some people are lucky, like some people can just completely be themselves and just like, get this platform and whatever. And some people are not even posting for a platform in general. I think that it's a pretty well-known thing as someone who even posts content that like you have an audience, you know what they might want, how you might get more people to watch what you're saying, etc. And some people can use these tips and tricks pretty ethically. Like they'll be like, okay, like maybe, I'll talk about this because it's trending right now or whatever. And they'll still like keep integrity. They'll still keep integrity to like, what they know as true or, just like there's not any goal in like culturally shifting people's perception of the world or whatever. I think sometimes though, this type of messaging is used in a way where it's like there is a goal in mind that might not be, if people knew of the goal, they wouldn't like it or they would be shocked to know these things. And I think you can figure out what the goal is as you watch more content from an individual and you can kind of like see like what might be prompting them to say certain things and do certain things. One thing I've always preached on my platform is just always be media conscious. You need to train yourself to, learn how to consume media and consume content. And it's something that, again, people are not going to want to learn because it's just, it makes it less fun. People want to pretend it's all real and they really know the people that they're watching. But the reality is it's always a character and you're seeing one side that is made for the character. Like, for example, like when Mr. Beast gives out like $1 million to some innocent random person on the street, he's recording that, right? And he's showing that on purpose. So it's just like, not to say it's like bad what he's doing, but it's like he's doing that on camera and it's everything that he's done in that video is intentional and he put that out himself. I think just knowing that is so important. And then when you can trace kind of like the consistencies and how people are branding and messaging, you can start to see like if maybe there is a narrative that's being told to me here, maybe I wouldn't like what the narrative is.
The thing that comes to mind for me is like making thumbnails, like that's that's always it's always a challenge. In a sense, I think it makes me better as a creator because it forces me to sort of simplify some of the ideas and put together a title and thumbnail that the general public can understand or enjoy. What was the word you said? Media something. I forgot what it was.
Consciousness or?
Oh yeah, media conscious. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to be media conscious. So when we look at this kind of recent trend for Gen Z specifically, going back to church, going to traditional religion, how do you feel about this new Christian trend, I guess?
Yeah. So again, I can't really say anything to the extent of like it's actually happening and that I don't know statistics. I think we're definitely seeing a rise, but I don't know how much so. My issue is mostly in how it's being kind of correlated with like certain ideas of like conservatism that I would definitely contend. Like again, like I said, there like we've kind of talked about, there are some use values to like being religious in that like you have community, you might have routine, you might feel like a part of something, and that's super important and that can help people. But what's happening is I think over time we've seen that conservatism, like that's why I've been referencing conservatism so much. We're talking about Christianity, is that they've become so coincided and seen as one and the same, and one is used to prompt the other and strengthen the other. I think that sometimes values that are told in the Bible can be used just in ways that would have detrimental effects on the well-being of society. It can be a good thing depending on how it's used. I just think it's so easy to use it as something that is negative. Like when we say something like, in the Old Testament, we see that women are told to submit and to act only through her husband or whatever. Let's put that into legislation. Or that's how I think we should spread that idea today. I think that's the way that you're using that rhetoric in the Bible is harmful. However, if you're saying, like maybe something like Jordan Peterson would say, I want to sacrifice myself and my time for other people in a healthy way, I think that's amazing. Like keep doing that. It just really depends on how it's being used and it's context dependent. But I would say that normally the way I'm seeing it, it's just like being correlated and conflated with so many harmful ideologies that I'm just almost seeing it like one and the same with conservatism. So yeah.
Yeah. When I see this trend, I look at some of the kind of statistics that we have. So for instance, the National Study of Youth and Religion, as well as Pew Research and the American Sociology Association, they've all done longitudinal surveys since the 1970s all the way until the 2020s, prior to COVID. And the general trend has been that religion in general, not just Christianity, but religion in general, has been on the decline. And the group that they would refer to as nones, meaning None, non-religious, they seem to be growing. I believe it was 15% of the population in the U.S. were non-religious back in the 1990s, and now it's up to somewhere in the 20-something percent. Additionally, these organizations also will link non-religion to a lot of physical and mental negative outcomes. Things like they smoke more often, they're more often drinking, they get pregnant a lot sooner in life. A lot of them report depression and anxiety more often than people who are religious. And there's a number of categories you can look at for all of this. When I see a new trend of people re-entering religion, I think that the argument people often make is, look, this is going to have a positive outcome for our society. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think there's a lot of nuance here that we're maybe skipping over, but I'd like to maybe hear your thoughts on this new trend of kind of getting back into religion. Is it a positive thing to fight back against all of these negative kind of mental health and physical health connotations?
This is actually so interesting because I'm a sociology major, and this direct statistic, was referenced in class where we were talking about how people make this claim that religion is correlated with better outcomes in life and just being less stressed and being happier. right? But the problem is this is just like it's going to be like a simple causation fallacy, where we're seeing a correlation, we're seeing a trend, we're acting as though, or we're perceiving that one variable is causing the other when really they're just correlated. So they're just grouped together. So when you look at religion, right, we can see that it predicts things like you're going to have a community, like you're just set up with a community, and this is going to probably just like help you have people to lean on. Right? Whereas if you don't, have religion, or whereas like this community can be found in different things, right? Like you could have communities in so many different ways, but like religion gives you that like immediate community. You're going to have routine, you're going to have norms to kind of cling to, and you're also going to have a wider, broader like group of people to kind of lean on. So all these things are kind of predicting like, these are all good qualities, like having community involvement and having discipline, and having, norms to tell you how to behave. Like, for example, like a religion will tell you that you should get married and you shouldn't divorce and you shouldn't drink and whatever. So you're just less likely to do those things. But the problem is that all of these tenets, like having, a belief system and having community involvement, are not necessary or exclusive to religion. Like all these things can exist without religion. There's like actually a study by, I think it was Lim and Putnam, and it basically said that atheists who are part of secular communities have or report similar health outcomes to people who are actually religious. So we're seeing that maybe what's predicting, this well-being is not actually like the fact that you are believing in like this Jesus Christ, but actually that you have a community and like you have a belief system and you're around it, right? So I think that this is kind of just we're getting back to like the cultural Christianity conversation, where it's just like these are functional uses of religion, but they're actually just not like directly like a necessity to only religion. And also we can just talk about the fact that like people who are religious and what they're likely to report. Like someone who's religious, like probably sees like something like reporting mental health as negative as like a bad thing, right? They're probably gonna be more traditional in their beliefs, probably gonna be more conservative. So like might not even trust mental health officials, might not even trust the science behind mental health. They're gonna be less likely to report depression and anxiety. Like it'd probably be more similar to someone like in the 50s or 60s who might have had anxiety or might have had depression, but didn't report that and instead rejected that idea, even though they were still experiencing it, which can add another layer of like an issue. What people who are religious are more likely to be people who are just like, we see, I think there's a study that says like people who are religious are more likely to already be at like good points in their life. They don't have anything to point to where it's just like, well, if God existed, why did he do blank to me, right? So it's a lot easier to kind of be religious when life has been going super well for you. So I think all these kind of factors can kind of explain the statistic pretty well.
When we look at other studies, specifically in like Scandinavian countries, and you mentioned another one, it was what was it called? It was Lynn and
it was Lim and Putnam, 2010.
Okay, and that's pretty recent too. That's awesome. But I'm pretty sure there's also studies in when we look at the Scandinavian countries that have been non-religious for a longer period of time. They also have systems in place for community growth in order to support people who don't have religion in their life. And we see similar numbers in those kind of nations. And so for me, the question is less, how can we get people to be more religious? Or is America like a Christian nation? And the question's more, how can we adapt our nation to accommodate for non-religion? Because I don't think the US is very accommodating for people who are non-religious. So to me, that's maybe the more appropriate question to be asking in these kind of scenarios.
Yeah, I think that just because this nation has kind of like the founders and just like historically we saw like a lot of like Christianity, just like at the foundation, and most people were Christian. But I think the correlation we're going to see in like why people are less religious is also just because of like things like science breakthroughs, more education. Like as we get more educated as a country, we're going to see things in science that are provable and kind of standardized contradict the Bible. Like for example, the more that people kind of go to college, I think it's proven that the less likely they are to be religious because things like evolution directly they directly contradict like fundamental beliefs in the Bible, like that, all animals were put on the earth immediately as it was created, just dating how the earth might have started, etc. So it's just like, I think that like we're seeing like people become less religious because of like the ways that we have explanations for things that we didn't have before, and just like access to education is becoming even more like standardized, and people are just, it's becoming a necessity to go to college in certain circumstances. And in that, I think we just kind of have to adapt here. I think it's going to kind of naturally happen as we like look through history. Like we see like there's change, like we see like there's a breakthrough or like a push towards something, and there's like a pushback after because people are reacting. And I think there's a study that says like conservatives, like one of their baseline like emotions is like fear. Like that kind of prompts a lot of their conservatism. They're scared of like change that comes from liberalism or progressivism. So we see that that pushback comes from conservatives at the time, but then we continue to make 2 other steps forward, another step back, and it keeps going that way. So I think that we're just going to need to have that natural adaptation happen where it's like people are able to exist in this world in a way that like they don't have to cling to something like religion, and they're able to exist as they do.
I do have a question. Are you familiar with metamodernism at all? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar. If you could explain it completely, that might work.
Well, you know what modernism is, correct?
Yeah.
And then postmodernism.
Mm-hmm.
Metamodernism's kind of this cultural shift. It's been happening. People argue that it's only been happening since like COVID. Some say it's been happening since the 90s. Basically, the idea is our culture is shifting from a postmodern perspective to this new perspective of metamodernism. And understand that it's basically a merging of the modernist perspective. Anyone can achieve their dreams if they work hard enough. We only trust science. That's kind of what modernism is. Postmodernism is, hey, look, you are saying that everyone can do this. Everyone's equal. Everyone has enough to accomplish whatever their dreams are and become successful. Postmodernism would say you are excluding the kind of other stories here. Not everyone is represented in every sort of aspect. And we look at it in terms of equality when in reality, not everyone starts on an equal playing field. So we can't see it as equality, but instead we should understand it as equality and sort of funneling resources to people. So then we can actually have a more egalitarian kind of society. So that would be postmodern. And then metamodern sees postmodern as this critique of modernism. And it says, look, postmodernism is great. It's pointing out a lot of the kind of niche groups and a lot of the problems with this single like narrative of everyone can find success, but it doesn't leave us with a lot of hope. And so metamodernism comes in and it says, let's try and see how we can still have dreams, still kind of chase success, while also recognizing that society is problematic and things are not equal. So that's kind of the basic idea. It's trying to merge the two concepts together. I don't know what your thoughts on that might be. Do you think this is a positive move? Do you think this might be why we see this kind of clinging to traditional religion, where people are trying to recapture a meaningful story to guide their life by? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea that I think I've thought about in some way, just not under the terms. But like the way I'm seeing it, as you've explained it, is like postmodernism is like the system is broken. There are things that are broken here, and that there is like a fundamental lack of inequality. And I think metamodernism is kind of saying like, yeah, the system is broken, but how do we live within it? How do I kind of find some type of joy? How do I kind of like, still live, right? And I think I definitely see, like for me, I think I would definitely see some pros of like both systems. I think both of those kind of would like kind of coincide of like where I sit, where I think we're at this point where it's like, we're getting more educated about like how the past informs our present and how we exist in a state where like all these ideologies of like, gender roles and like race are just not only have been historically like systemic, but have set us up to all have these implicit beliefs about each other. that are a lot of times flawed and lead to negative outcomes for different groups? And is there any way to kind of completely uproot those, to kind of extract these core beliefs that have existed in our minds since like the day we were born? That's difficult to say. It's hard to say if that's even possible. But I think that metamodernism, if everyone kind of were able to like grapple with these ideas, I think it would be amazing, because we could kind of see like, okay, like, yeah, these things suck and yeah, we all exist in it, but like, how can we like all acknowledge this? I think that's the first important step. Like, hey, something bad is happening, something wrong happened, which is we're just not even there yet. People like to make this argument that everyone's already at this equal playing field, and that people are wanting handouts, right? Just because, right? Which doesn't really make any historical sense, but whatever, I digress. So it's like, if we could just get to that point where we all acknowledge like, hey, there are problems and people are disadvantaged, right? For reasons that they don't deserve. We could then get to this point of like, okay, what's the most intuitive, effective, efficient way to reconcile these discrepancies in a way that's meaningful, in a way that doesn't negatively impact anyone, etc. At this point, I don't know how many people even know that, or really can acknowledge or intuitively understand that, like, hey, there are people who are not just leeching off the system, do not just want handouts, but are actually historically put in a position lower than you for an invalid reason. But I do think that, for people who are starting to like see like that click and understanding this, they're getting to this point of like metamodernism, where it's just like, what can we do? How can I do my part? And yeah, I think with cultural Christianity, I don't know, I don't think I would say like a lot of Christians or cultural Christians. I think some would probably be like culturally Christian for this reason of just like wanting to like guide their life in some way. Like maybe they're like a nihilist or something, or like they're like atheists in some way, but they think, okay, you know what? I want to make do with this life I have. I want to like hold these values, just to guide my life in a good way. I think some people are like that, but I think most kind of are Christian in the traditional sense. But I think I would love it if we kind of just like have everyone read up on these ideologies and kind of just like understand this as fact, because once we get to the fact of reality and how it exists, we can start to move forward and still have a conversation of even if there's actually a problem. So yeah.
Well, Zina, I have had a great time having you here on the podcast. How can people learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me anyway. It's been super cool to have this conversation and learn about these different topics. You can find me on TikTok and on Instagram as well. My TikTok is ZINA'S, ZINAAWEENAA. Same thing with my Instagram, so you can find me on both those platforms. And I think that, I think we just need to keep learning, and that's what I try to do with my platform, is to spread this knowledge and understanding. So I hope that they'll resonate with that. Yeah.
Awesome. And I can't end this conversation without asking this. Are you potentially going to have a follow-up conversation with Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, so I would love that. I have kind of publicly like asked him if he disagreed with any of my categorization of our conversation to kind of like follow up with me. I think that it would be really cool to have that discussion, because we ended off on an I don't know. But it's seeming like, I don't know how he is kind of receiving this response from the video. I think it's probably a lot right now, but if he would want to, I would so be down to kind of continue the conversation we had. And hopefully in some point in the future, you can get that.
Mr. Peterson, if at all you're listening to this, get this girl on your podcast. Come on. Like we need to have a follow-up. Very interesting conversation. I think the public wants to hear. Thank you for listening to this conversation with social media influencer Zina. You can find her information linked down below. I'd like to end things off with a quote from Jordan Peterson himself. You can only find out what you actually believe, rather than what you think you believe, by watching how you act. You simply don't know what you believe before that. Go, stay curious, and be blessed. I'll see you guys in the next one.